again, not that all the hookers are going to take to the streets and protest, but we should be protesting this. We should be furious about these laws that we're currently sitting under and demanding change.
Welcome back to Muse on the Mic. I'm Riley.
And I'm Emily. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Muse on the Mic. We are coming with some updated news. We love a hot topic when we find one. And this one's Canadian. So what are we doing today, Riley?
We have a bit of an update on Canadian sex work law. It was an article that we're going to reference from the Toronto Star. And I believe the case that we're going to be discussing is going to trial later this year. So we're going to jump into the article and changes and our hopes for the future.
Our hopes for the future. I love that. That's the tone we got to keep, because change is a brewing. Let's hope. And without the hope, we don't have much else. But before we get into that, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, comment down below if you have anything else to add to the topic. We love hearing from the people. And for anyone new here, we are owners of a spicy body rub parlor in Toronto, which means happy endings, the best kind of endings, which we're hoping in this topic too. So let's hope it all ties hand in hand. Riley, I'm going to jump right in and just start from the article. When you have stuff to say, barrel over me so I don't overtalk you, because you know I love politics.
You do.
It gets me excited. I'm swinging my feet right now. I know you can't see it, but I'm like, politics stuff. So, bit of backstory for either those that aren't Canadian, haven't watched our show before, or aren't subscribed to the Patreon, actually. Our main sex work law episode is on Patreon. More reasons to go subscribe to the Patreon, right? In 2014, so 10 years ago, there was a change to federal law here about prostitution laws, and they moved to a model called the Nordic model, which is a structure of law format, and it is not our favorite situation whatsoever. What the Nordic model means is that it entitles a worker, a sex worker, to sell his or her sexual services, but it criminalizes the client to purchase sexual services. It also allows the worker to enterprise in the sense that she can hire an accountant or a driver, a maid to clean the room she works out of, like all kinds of like service around it. However, the service providers themselves, if they claim that income as taxes, are living off the avails of prostitution and therefore criminalizes the driver, the accountant, etc. I see you shaking your head because like it's wild. Like make it make sense. And the premise or the reason behind this law was to deter what is considered, by stereotypical standards, the creepy clients from buying from the dirty hookers. And it has never resulted in that because, as most people know, sex work is the oldest profession in the world. It is completely international. It will never go away. And the more you add regulations and restrictions like the Nordic model, you are basically pushing workers into riskier situations. And that is one thing that the anti-sex work advocates don't want to acknowledge, aside from some bigger issues that we're about to dive into. But that's the basis of it, is, an affluent or well-to-do customer is not going to risk committing a crime in order to see that escort he found online. A shadier client is much more likely to take such risks. For the worker, that means she can't, set up a brothel situation or a collective where a number of workers come together and, let's say, rent a condo or, own a house or something where they work out of. And the problem with that means that they are pushed into shadier situations to work. Not everything means back alley, but sometimes it literally means back alley. And we all can imagine with our own, imaginations what would go wrong in that kind of a situation. It's literally in the shadows. Nobody knows you're there. It's a shady circumstance with a shady customer, and all kinds of harmful things can happen in those circumstances. It has never reduced the amount of sex work being traded for money. So here we are in the grand fight, and this new case has gone through the lower courts in the appeals, and it's about to head to Supreme Court for trial, and that is exciting. I say that with a ginormous, humongous chunk of salt, not just a grain, because the one thing that is the most frustrating when it comes to sex work law analysis and these kinds of cases across the globe is they never, ever, 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 ever want to hear from us. They never want to hear from the workers, from the people involved in the front lines of the industry. I mean, even in our position as owners, we see in real time what happens with a bad client, what happens with a girl in harm's positions. We've had to rescue workers before from harmful situations. We've helped save some girls from harmful situations. And it's always when there is some sort of governing reason why they're not allowed to make decisions for themselves, have autonomy over their own body, set their own rules and boundaries and all kinds of different things when it comes to the services that they're providing. And yet again, with this case, one of the top Canadian experts and advocacy groups that work with sex workers, thousands of us across the entire country, were denied participating in this upcoming case. And that is, the thing that triggered me first, that made me send the article to you. And I was like, we're doing another show on the law because what the fuck, yet again. And I always find that part so frustrating because who knows what they need most than the worker doing the work.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's like, just to put it into context for some of you that are less political like myself, like imagine, for example, a board coming together to patent a new design for braces, but they actually don't consult dentists. Like right. That would make no sense, right? Like they don't speak to the people that live it, breathe it, work it, earn it, living on it. They just make law for them and around them as they're just standing by watching.
It's so scary and it's so dangerous because there's so many jobs out there that are high risk, right? Construction workers, factory workers, all kinds of people put themselves in harm's way, and they have workers' rights associations and unions and all kinds of protections that make things mandatory to be the safest possible. And there's always room for improvement with all kinds of safety, right? Technology, innovation, awareness, all of those things will change how you construct a house now to how you did in the 50s, right? And all of that kind of stuff comes together from the voices of the people on those front lines that are there sweating, swinging a hammer, hitting those nails day in and day out. And it's exactly the same situation with us. And yet the only profession in the entire planet that I can think of that is not allowed to vouch for their own safety advocacy. It's crazy. Like, can you imagine telling a plumber, like, he's not allowed to do something the safest way because he doesn't know any better? And what the assumption is always from the anti-sex work community that there is no such thing as an adult sex worker that would choose sex work. It's so rooted in like slut shaming stigma, right? Like, how would any adult choose this? That's impossible. So even if there isn't a trafficker, they're assumed victims of trafficking, which crazy again, right? These words coming out of my mouth don't make logical sense. But imagine a plumber or someone in that kind of a construction situation where you have to be an expert. An electrician's good example too. And you can be a plumber. You can't have customers that buy your plumbing because that's not allowed. You can't say or speak to, workers' comp agencies and so on and the government about what would make your day safer or how not to lose a leg in an accident or not be electrocuted and all these different precautions because high-risk jobs are high-risk jobs, right? And all they do is ask the religious people what they think and roll laws out like that. It is absolutely like kind of jaw-dropping to me. It's a little bit wild. And I've never quite understood why they're so afraid to hear from us, because no one would be able to explain it any better than workers. And that goes from high-end sex work straight through to low-end, more risky, dangerous sex work, right? I've never worked on a street corner. I've never worked on like a highway type situation. I've never worked at a strip club. I can assume a lot of things. I can speak to other workers and find out. But who would better be able to speak to what the big problems are and legalities in a strip club more than the stripper?
Right.
I mean, no offense to owners, but what the hell do we even know? Like, the owner of the strip club does not know the same things that the worker does. And even from my time where I was a worker, things have changed. society's changed. We didn't have we didn't internet. I'm not that old, but like we didn't have all of the social media and a phone on your hip and a separate phone for clients and all these different things when I started the business. I still had a pager. Like it was a long time ago. And so you didn't have access. And yet here you are with this machine in your hand where you could call 911 if you need it. But if you're a sex worker of any kind, you can't do that because you'll be criminally charged. The person that just abused you may or may not be criminally charged, depending if they let him off the hook, because often the worker is to blame.
Right.
Like it just, no matter how you slice it, it doesn't make sense. So I was excited to hear that this case is coming up because opportunity to voice the other opinions of the other sides and other like real lived experiences is always a great option, right? Awareness can breed empathy. And I know most people don't go about their day stressing what's happening to the poor hookers. But at the same time, when you become aware of something, you're able to choose change. And I think that's the most important thing. If there was community push to make these situations better so that there were, less sex workers going missing, less Indigenous women in Canada that are part of the sex trade, being murdered, getting harmed and all kinds of different things, then people would care more and they'd want their politicians to speak to those rights. And it's exactly that is at the heart of this particular case, because the argument is it's actually two people that aren't even sex workers. They are arguing for the fact that the current law system violates sex workers' Charter of Civil Rights and Freedoms. And for our American folks, that's our civil rights. It's the basic freedoms that every citizen is allowed to get, that automatically have, and are not supposed to be taken away whatsoever. Well, we're the only job in the whole world that this is being removed from. And it means that we don't have autonomy. And that is terrifying. There's no situation too where men lose autonomy on a lot of things, right? There's no forced birth control on them. There's no, abortion issues with them and like so many different situations. And the majority of sex workers are female. Not all. There's LGBTQ chunk and there's a chunk of men, although they're a smaller demographic. It ties into the similar structures of the silencing of those same marginalized communities, very much prevalent with our Indigenous community here too in Canada, more so than America for sure. So now that this case is coming up, the main argument is about some of these advocacy groups that deal with sex work law and protecting sex work and sex workers across this country. We're talking people with 20, 30 years experience that are being literally told that they cannot participate in the upcoming hearings. And that causes me so much frustration because why are we being eliminated? Like you said about the dentist thing, imagine medical experts or crime experts or, domestic terrorism experts being kicked out of hearings about big issues that involve people's safety. I can't imagine. Like, what if it was about children or something? And they were like, we can't hear from the teachers or from the primary caregivers of any kind, or never was, a pediatrician allowed to say, like,
yeah.
How do you make decisions for your family when you don't even have basic civil rights? It's so frustrating.
And I mean, I get it from the standpoint of like those anti-sex work angle or people that are come from that angle. But in a courtroom where it's supposed to be unbiased and the law should be fair, why wouldn't they at least allow sex workers to have a voice? Because they need to be heard. Whether or not what they say gets taken into consideration, that's up to them. But at least to have the voice is extremely important.
It's true. It's so true. Our voices should be the loudest ones in the whole bunch, right? We should be leading that charge. We should be the ones demanding change. We should be, again, not that all the hookers are going to take to the streets and protest, but we should be protesting this. We should be furious about these laws that we're currently sitting under and demanding change. And when they won't even hear your voice at the table, it just limits you so much. And this silly Nordic model is a perfect example of things that people come up with to try and like, I don't even know, is it to like rein us in or to make us disappear? Like, I don't even understand the end game really, because, okay, let's say you put all the dirty johns, all the pervs buying sex in the same slammer, right? You put them all in a cage together in a jail cell. then what? Then what
Mhm.
happens to all the workers? What happens to all the mouths they feed and all the responsibilities and their mental health and their financial health and their well-being, their opportunities and so many things? I mean, you run someone through a criminal system and suddenly your post sex work employment options are being taken away one at a time because a
Mhm.
law that works against you while you're just trying to get through a day without being killed. Like what? How? There's no other job in the world that gets treated like this. It is so darn frustrating. Um, but I did come across another random article from the US that I wanted to share with you, Riley. I haven't told you about this one yet. Um, and kind of explain yet another example of ridiculous ways that government or law enforcement try to come up with ways to control the hookers. Okay, so get this one right because this one blew my mind. I found this thread on Twitter,
Okay.
and the actual article comes from reason.com. It's an American site. I'm not familiar with it, but the article is called Prostitution Surveillance Tower Goes Up in San Diego. I'm going to make sure our editor throws the image up so everyone can see what we're talking about. I know you've taken a quick peek at it and you were like,
Yeah.
what am I looking at? It reminds me of like the borders of like a prison yard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that whole
But
I don't
what are
know, that
they
whole vibe.
hoping
So
to capture? Like literally head being given on the street or what looks like a transaction? Like what are they hoping to find here?
and herein lies the hypocrisy, right? Because I mean, if someone's giving a head on the street corner, they should be arrested for indecency or
Right.
like public nudity. They shouldn't be like charged federally as criminals. That's crazy. But there should not be sidewalk BJs. Like that's just I get that, right? Like we
Right.
all get that. We're not here for frivolousness. And that's why I think people can get confused about legalization versus decriminalization. Because if it's legalized, you almost think free for all, right? Kind of
Right.
how weed is now, right? Every goddamn corner has a dispensary. But we don't want that either. We realize appropriateness. You know, schools
Right.
don't need strip clubs next door. That would be crazy to think. Decriminalization means that we're not controlled by the government. It means we have free autonomy to make our choices. But to come up with weird things like this is really strange. So the tweet itself said this sex surveillance tower won't actually stop prostitution, of course, but it is a way for authorities to look like they're doing something about sex trafficking, while further normalizing the idea of conducting broad, warrantless surveillance of everyone. If this was surveilling anything other than what they're calling it, people would be livid. You can't surveil me taking my kids to like baseball everywhere I go, or like imagine police towers like this monitoring your children at the park or like
Right.
school or something. Like it just gets more inappropriate the more you like think
So
about
you
it.
think it's them not being honest, that it is just city surveillance and they're putting it under, we're trying to stop trafficking so that people accept? Is that what you're saying?
More or less. So
Okay.
this comes from a small county in San Diego, California. And there's apparently moral panic about sex work can lead to laws that enforce practices that reach far beyond anyone engaged with or participating in erotic labor. I love that expression, by the way. Erotic labor is so clever. Um, the latest example comes from San Diego County, California, where cops are putting up a creepy surveillance tower under the auspice of stopping sex sellers and sex buyers from meeting. So there's some dick with binoculars in this tower, or like security guy with all the monitors, just being like, "I know you're buying and you're selling." Like it's so
Right.
creepy and so inappropriate. Um, so it's stationed around National City's Roosevelt Avenue, which happens to be a high traffic area for shady stuff, I would assume.
Hmm.
Um, so they're trying to normalize this tower, even though it's kind of alarming, like the
Hmm.
local community. Whereas normally it's the local community that would tell the cops you have to do something about such and such problem, right? But they're going so far as to they think it's claiming to help reduce prostitution by recording the license plate numbers of people who enter the area.
Hmm.
Just enter the area.
It
What if
must
you
be
work there?
like a some sort of red light district without being called that, maybe where they all congregate, something.
And could you imagine just writing down everyone's license plate to do what? To do what?
Well,
Intimidate
but
citizens?
it reminds me very much so of the Nordic model and the flaws in that, because if these women are not able to screen their clients, they're simply just jumping in cars and going. So they don't have choice. They don't necessarily have consent. They're not safe.
Mhm. How scary is that to think? The
Hmm.
jumping in cars with no conversation at all.
Right.
That's terrifying. I feel like if I was in a desperate scenario hitchhiking, I wouldn't get in a car without having a conversation. Like, and that was me in need. Like, are you
Right.
kidding me? I can, and in a shady area, I can't imagine. It's so crazy.
Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Tip with Riley. So today we're talking about acronyms, but with a twist. Acronyms were first introduced into our vocabulary somewhere around the 1950s, and now they're a part of our daily conversations, some even being introduced into the dictionary. So while you're probably thinking of LOL, WTF, BRB, the sex industry heavily uses this shortened code language. The adult industry has an acronym for almost every service. And while I believe these code words were introduced to evade police or to conceal services being offered, it really has evolved into a simplistic way to place your order. So here's a few. Most of you probably know DATY, dining at the Y, eating pussy. There's also DATO, rimming.
If this tip isn't enough, subscribe to Patreon for the whole thing.
So the scheme, I love how this, like the writer worded all this. The scheme is to catch people who want to pay consenting adults for sex. And it seems to be a waste of money, manpower, and a huge violation of privacy, free association, bodily autonomy, and the like. They even think that punishing prostitution customers or the sex workers themselves is a swell idea. And it's hard to see beyond these logics how the surveillance tower makes any sense. You can't charge someone for simply picking up another person off the street. What if it's your friend that needs a ride?
Right.
Like, then you have to go to court to prove you're not a hooker? This is crazy. They're causing so many more problems. Even if police think the person on the street looks like a sex worker, they're documenting, recording, taking photos, identity. If you're in a car, your car stuff. If you're walking down the street, video of you walking. Even if money is visibly exchanging hands, it's not a crime technically to give someone cash. You have to prove that they're
Right.
buying something, much like a drug deal, right?
Hmm.
You can owe someone $20, meet them on the corner in front of like the 7-Eleven, hand them $20. You didn't commit a crime.
Right.
Like, they're so stigma based. This drives me nuts, this stuff. Um, Anyway, unless the entire sexual exchange happens right there in front of the cameras, it's hard to imagine on what basis cops could possibly make any charges about this stick. Besides the tower being very visible and local media publicizing it, smart sex workers and their customers are already moving to other less visible areas, which goes into what you just said, right? If the surveillance tower has any impact at all, it's going to drive prostitution from one part of the city to another. That's it. Full stop.
Wow.
The article goes on, but I was like, what the fuck?
That's
Are
wild.
you serious? Again, in what world does this happen to any other type of career? In what universe would they put, surveillance to monitor the teachers? Or,
Right.
like I can't imagine it. It makes no sense. Like, you can't waitress because that's a crime. You can't use your tip money to go home on the bus, like, and the cop station tower thing is going to watch you the whole time, and like you see the cameras moving as you walk along the street. Like, it's psycho. It
Right.
doesn't help. It causes so much further harm, because if just putting cameras on corners solved crime in general, there'd already be cameras on every corner. And I realize there's a lot of
Right.
cameras out there,
There
right?
is.
Every business has surveillance, traffic lights, etc. But that didn't mean all the murders went away.
No,
It
no,
doesn't mean
this
nobody
is
gets
true.
robbed anymore. You
This is
know,
true.
pandemic, we all went running around with face masks, and you used to not be able to walk into a bank that way. And now that's just ordinary shit. People still rob banks.
Yeah.
People hack things online. Even they don't even need brick and mortar to do crime. Like, there is so much potential for wrong that this stupid tower. And what if your kids are like in the car and they're like, "Mommy, what's that?" Like when they see a water tower or something. Like, well, that's the hooker patrol.
And imagine you're like your husband or your wife works by there and it'd be like, no, we got to walk down the block because if I pick you up near the tower, we're going to be, you're going to be called a prostitute.
Right, and he's the John or the pimp because he's driving her. And then
Yeah.
their license plate is recorded. And then what happens the next time they try to, I don't know, register their plates or, whatever they're doing. And all of a sudden that's in some government record somewhere. Like it just leads to not just more confusion about the law and what's legal, what's not. It leads to harm, obviously, for the worker, potential harms for the customer if they're in equally shady situations. But talk about a piss waste of local resources and money. I'm sure this county and plenty others have bridges to fix and roads to build and, Wi-Fi to distribute and all of the infrastructure and support that cities need. I bet every teacher in that county has to buy their own damn school supplies. And you're telling me that you can't take that money out of this fucking tower and all the salaries going into this stupidity and better your community and build some spots where some sex workers can work safely and nobody's fucking harmed in that circumstance? Oh, that shit just makes me rage. What a waste. What an absolute waste. I don't get involved in city politics very often, but that would make me furious, especially if we had bigger needs in our city. That's crazy.
Yeah. And I think what it boils down to is, there's morals and everyone can view things differently. And I appreciate everyone has the right to choose how they feel on sex work or any topic. But I don't think your personal morals should come into play when passing law. Like that it shouldn't be part of the equation. And I think that's where the law keeps getting it wrong.
Absolutely. And so far, at least from, I do a lot of research on this stuff, but I haven't studied every country in the world. But from what I know, the only country that has ever taken the consideration of sex workers has been Australia. And Australia has actual functioning decriminalized sex work structure. And that means, again, all the things we just said, right? Autonomy, choice, your own rates, your own boundaries. You can work where you want. You can do so without having to worry about your car being monitored or creeping in and out through the back door and like these kind of things. You can proudly say, if you want to say, you can keep it hush. If you want to be hush, you can file your taxes like a normal person. You can hire a driver. You can have an accountant. You can do normal shit like a normal business and enterprise together as a collective. You can work out of a brothel. Brothels are placed in areas away from schools, family, residential areas, very much like our zoning works in Toronto in terms of our legalities. And that to me is common sense. And I don't think there is a single sex worker or advocacy group that would argue against those kinds of stipulations, right? Not restrictions, not laws and governing things, stipulations. Don't be near the children. That's pretty fucking simple. I don't think there's a strip club owner out there that'd be like, no, I need to be not near the elementary school. Put us in the community center. Like, that's outlandish and outrageous. At the same time, the stigmas that lead to this anti-sex work sentiment does not come from a place of common sense. It comes from the religious bias. And like you said, court cases are supposed to be unbiased. It's supposed to be bipartisan, both sides considered. And tell me another situation where those voices are not allowed at the table. It's so frustrating. And I know it's not everyone's hot topic, especially right now in politics. There's a lot going on in the world. But at the same time, the next time local elections are coming up, provincial elections for us and federal election next year, it's important to consider everybody. And in those things, we count too. And unfortunately, the conservative government has never done us well, and the liberal government has never really stepped up to change it. So we need to rely on the smaller courts to do this appeal process back and forth for a decade now, just to get that opportunity to sit at the Supreme Court. And how disappointing and frustrating that the leading voices for sex work safety are being discluded from this case and this argument. It's super frustrating, but we want to build awareness so that people are at least more in the know. I realize that most people don't sit around and make their political decisions even about sex work law. But for me, that's my life, and that's obviously a different situation. But there's a lot of people that have, for years didn't care about gay rights either, or all kinds of different things that need change. But once you become aware of the issues, you kind of have to take a moral standing on something. And do you want these people harmed? Because sex workers are going to exist regardless.
Yeah.
And so do we want them harmed or do we want them safe? I guarantee communities would be safer if we're safer as well, because there's just less opportunity for extra crimes to happen. And those people that want to do harms against other people are going to just have to find different ways to do it, because suddenly if sex workers weren't easy pawns, they'd have to think up a new game or something, go read a book, get a GED and find like a real job, like they love to tell us.
Or, I mean, if the focus really was on human trafficking, because it is a problem and it is a real
Absolutely.
thing. So put those dollars, put that manpower, make those laws to be enforced for the bad players, for people that are trafficking young women or children, and let the sex workers work. Let them just have autonomy of their body and get paid for a hard job. It is hard work that they put in every day, and they should be able to have rights. I even go back to a video you had sent me the other day about sex work as well. But the guy in the video references how hard a job it really is, especially in the beginning. You want to become a sex worker, you have to get a portfolio of pictures, build a website, gain clientele, go through all that clientele, figure out who's good clients, who you want to keep on the list, find somewhere to work. Yeah. It is a big job, and there's a lot of moving components to it. It's not just going to the street corner. So there is low-level prostitution, and there's very kind of classy, high-end prostitution, everything in between. And those that want to make it a career put in a lot of work.
I mean, it's no different than us starting this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. We thought, hit record and just do some stuff. Turns out it's a full-time separate job, right? The back end of sex work is a lot of work. I mean, people love to crack jokes about us. We don't always have to be at the office, but they're like, so you don't work? And I'm like, if y'all knew how much work we do to run our parlor every single day, no days off, owners get no days off. We're lucky if we get Christmas and New Year's off, like the actual day, and then it's back to business. It's so much work, the advertising, the marketing. I wouldn't know where to begin if I was an independent escort right now, how to establish screening procedures. I mean, I know some girls I would go to and ask what they do, but off the top of my head, if someone was like, I'm going to put you in a room with a notebook and you got to figure this out, I wouldn't know where to begin. And so you need that community. And if you can't have communication, which is what screening is as well, and again, work together, just as much as it would be cool to have escorts, let's say, sharing a space and therefore sharing rent and bills, there are escort situations where they share chat groups to warn each other about bad dates. Like, these networks are so vital in terms of not just the success of the worker, her income, her profitability, her notoriety in the industry, reputation, etc., but to build strong clientele, to build repeat business, just like any other salesperson or any other service provider. I mean, a hairdresser needs regular clients too, right? The overhead is a lot. And you still got to do all the business end of things. You have to have that accountant. You have to still find a way to file your taxes and claim what you wish. I mean, that's up to them and their accountant, right? But your accountant shouldn't be in fear of being a federal criminal just because this girl needs some help, putting the numbers into some forms. Like, it's absolutely mind-boggling. Imagine how much better everyone's lives could be, including the people that sex work money goes to fund. Our girls often are moms. They've got their own kids to feed. They've got families. Some of them are supporting elderly family that are sick and have crazy overhead expenses. They've moved countries and changed their entire lives. And this is an opportunity for them to make something fabulous out of potentially some struggling situations. And by the eye of the law, they're deemed questionable or not worthy of having complete civil rights and charters of rights and freedoms, like we call it here in Canada. I just want everyone to care.
I know you do.
I really do, but I think articles like this, like they must help. I mean, the few people that read them, the people that are listening to this, and greater discussion amongst our community, which certainly circles through social media. I mean, sex work Twitter is pretty massive, guys. If you're not on sex work Twitter, you need to find your way into sex work Twitter because there's a lot to learn. I learn every day from seeing especially tweets from escorts in other countries. I'm fascinated by what they talk about. And you can learn about different things that work and don't work. And imagine if that was a global collective of finding ways to be safer. And we found out Australia does this really well and Thailand does this really well. And, each little place, and we all kind of put it together to have this solid format of safety, profitability, and autonomy. I mean, that's ideal, right?
I agree.
Let's hope our Supreme Court listens to somebody, because they certainly aren't listening to us.
We'll see what
Well,
happens later this year with this case, and hopefully it's all good news.
definitely. As we hear things, we will keep all y'all updated for sure. And we'll link the articles in the description below. So if you're curious, take a gander yourself, and watch out for street towers.
Big brother's out there.
I just want to egg it. That's all. Go to San Diego and just toss a dozen eggs at every camera I see in that stupid tower. What a waste of logic. Hilarious. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope everybody learned a little bit, at least, and take it into consideration the next time you're checking a box on a voting card. Make sure you consider all of us involved. And I guess we will see you on the next episode of MUSE On The Mic. Bye, guys.